Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am so excited for this episode. I'm super excited because I'm going to talk about something that I think is very important, and I've gotten some questions about it. And when I started out, I had a lot of questions about it, and we're going to be talking about show versus tell, what the difference is, how to not make mistakes when you're trying to show instead of telling, and things like that. But before we get started, if you are new here, then welcome. Thank you so much for checking out the channel. I hope you stick around and subscribe. My name is Inessa, and I am an indie author, and I publish under the pen name A. Sage. I write YA, mostly fantasy, paranormal, sci-fi, that kind of stuff. And every week on this channel, I share my tips, my tricks, and things that I kind of learned along the way of being an indie author and what it means to be an indie author in today's kind of authorship environment. I also share a lot of planning videos because I am obsessed with planning. So if you're into that, then you're going to like that as well. But before we get started with show versus tell and what that means, I have a couple of announcements. One very big life announcement, and one somewhat big, I guess, announcement for the business. So with that said, my big life announcement is that I am over 7 months pregnant, and we are having a baby in March. Now I'm saying this is not going to interrupt anything. I know if you've watched my last goal setting video, which I'll try to link somewhere in the cards and in the description below, but I've talked about batching content for this channel to have it ready. And this is exactly why, because come March, I won't have so much time. I am taking a bit of a mat leave. It's a bit harder to take a mat leave when you work for yourself, but you know, it is doable. So we're doing what we can. So if you've seen me, you know, get like rounder, I'm not wearing any of my rings anymore. It's because I am quite big now. So I've gotten big. I can't hide it anymore. Not that we were hiding it, and it just, you know, never really came up. So now you know. I will be away for a small period between March and May, kind of mid-May there. So I'm not taking a huge leave, but I do need to take a break, obviously, from social media and just working and all of that. With that said, there will be content. I'm working on having content still regularly. So every single week, there will still be a video on this channel. And then that was the life announcement. And then the business announcement is I have now opened pre-orders for my fantasy book cover design course. So you can sign up now. There is an introductory price for the first month of the launch. Is $3.99 for the first launch of the month, and then we'll go up from there to $4.99. And you do get lifetime access. So if you want to grab it now at the lower price, you'll have access to the course for a lifetime. So any updates that come in, you can just have it right away there. It is run by Thinkific, so you'll need to start a free learner's account with them. Just kind of submit your name, email, that kind of stuff, like for any other platform. And then you can go ahead and pre-order through Thinkific directly. So I will link like a link for that down below in the description if you want to sign up, if you want to learn the art of fantasy book cover design. Now I should mention you do need to have previous knowledge of Photoshop. This isn't a Photoshop course. This is strictly a book cover design course and a digital illustration kind of course and photo composition course for fantasy specifically. There will be other courses coming up throughout the year, but this one is specifically for fantasy book covers. So if you don't have knowledge of Photoshop, or you've always wanted to learn Photoshop, I mean, there's lots of stuff you can learn online, even on YouTube and things like that. So you can go ahead and pick up some skills on that first and then sign up for the course, or grab the course now while it's at a cheaper price, and then learn as you go, basically, for everything I do. Take my time in explaining everything I do, in every module. So I don't skip over anything, but if you are not familiar with Photoshop at all, I would definitely suggest familiarizing yourself with Photoshop first. With that said, all of the announcements are out of the way, and we can now get right into show versus tell. So show versus tell is a baffling concept when you're first starting to write. I had no idea what show versus tell meant. It took me a very long time to understand it. I remember learning about it still back in school when I took creative writing in university. And even then, it was difficult to understand. Like, I had a tough time grasping it. So I just wanted to kind of share some tips, some like little advice on what it means to show versus tell, and hopefully that will clarify it more for you. So there's a couple ways to go about showing and not telling. The main difference is you don't want to tell your reader anything. Like, you don't want to hit them over the head with something. You want them to be able to imagine what you're trying to say in their minds, as if a movie is playing out in their minds, right? So you're going to show them things. You're not going to just tell them things. Which, again, when you say it like that, you think, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then when you start writing, a lot of times, and I do this to this day too, where I have to go back and I have to delete some of my tells and change them into shows. I think every author, no matter how seasoned you are, you're always going to go back and kind of make that mistake a little bit. So here's some little tips that I think work for me, especially when not just when I'm writing that first draft, but it works really well when I'm revising and editing my own drafts after. So you want to use sensory details. So what does that mean, sensory details? So sensory details are details that evoke an emotion, something that grabs attention. So if you're talking about a city, for example, you're describing a city alley. Your character is in a city alley. Don't just say this character was in a city alley. It was dark. It was a dark city alley. Describe the city alley. You know, are there pigeons lining the sidewalk? Is there like a smell of warm sewage coming up? Are there honking cars echoing in the distance? Like, you want to describe as much of the sensory details about the scene as you can, so that your reader can truly immerse themselves in the city alley and put themselves in the shoes of your character. Another thing you want to think about for show versus tell is you want to remove descriptive verbs, right? And you want to describe it instead. So what I mean by that, is things like, a good one is felt. So saying she felt this, he felt that. You want to take anything that's like a descriptive word, such as felt or feel, or anything that evokes that kind of verb as well. And you want to describe the feeling. So let's say if your character is anxious, instead of saying she felt anxious or she was anxious or whatever, describe what that could be like. She could have clammy hands, right? Heart racing, a little bit sweat on the forehead. Like, that's all the things that we associate with being anxious. And so you want to kind of describe the feeling instead of saying the feeling, right? If that makes sense. The emotion thesaurus, which I have linked below, is very good for that, because it's like an amazing resource to have, and it has like a list of different feelings and what the physical attributes are to those feelings and what the internal and external attributes are. So it will tell you like what internally a character could be going through, or a person goes through, and what they could be doing externally to evoke that kind of emotion, right? So I would definitely check that book out if you haven't already. Another good kind of trick to use for show versus tell is to use dialogue to show character. So not just like describe your character and describe their personality, but show it through dialogue. So the way they speak, their mannerisms when they speak, just kind of describing that as well, and using your words in your dialogue, their actual dialect, instead of just saying like, oh, they were a very antsy person, or they were, they had a short fuse, right? You could just show how this character, like if they're interacting with someone else, how do they have a short fuse, right? Their words could be clipped, like they could be speaking very, very fast, short sentences, always looking at like the clock or something, or they're just like always fidgeting. And that kind of describes your character instead of you like in words describing your character. So dialogue can go a very long way in show versus tell. You also want to add very strong details. So think about the details you're adding. Don't just add details for the sake of bulking up, right? So you can have like those long kind of descriptions, like in like the rolling hills and all of that, which is nice that they have a time and place. But if you're adding details for the sake of adding details, then they're not strong details. So your details should really have a purpose to them. Every detail you add, there's a reason why you're adding it, right? And it's not just to describe the way your character looks or describe what scenes they're going through. It should always, like we said before, evoke emotion, right? So, for example, if you're saying like a sentence like, I saw the light reflect off the water as the sun set, right? And that's fine. That's a sentence. But you're telling the reader, it's, I saw the light reflect and the sun was setting. Like, you're kind of putting everything in this one sentence. Instead, you could say something like, the orange glow bounced off the waves, making my eyes water, as the sun brightened the beach, right? So now you have this feeling, you can feel the glow kind of in the sun on your face. You can feel your eyes water as the sun is setting and kind of reflecting off of the water and just illuminating the beach, right? So it's a kind of a difference between those two sentences. One is, yes, longer, but the details are stronger in the longer sentence, right? If that makes sense. You also want to think about describing action instead of the actual scene, right? So instead of, like, let's say your character is late for work, right? Instead of saying that, this character was late for work because she was running late, she had a mean boss, like whatever you might want to put there. Or instead of saying like she's running through like a busy area to try to get to work because she's late again, her boss is going to be mad. So you can use something like a passage like this. So I just wrote it. Stella checked her watch, sweat collecting on her brow. She darted to the nearest staircase, wincing when the broad shoulder of a burly man clipped her own. Her eyes met the watch hands again. Great, she thought. I'm definitely getting written up this time. Right? So you're using the description of the actions that she's going through to try to get to work while describing the scene. So, there's like some other people there. A man is in her way, clips her shoulder, right? Like knocks her back. She keeps checking her watch. There's like sweat collecting on her brow, which is the emotion of anxiousness that we talked about before. So all of that description is much stronger than just saying Stella was late for work and her boss was going to be pissed if she was late again, right? Like something like that is much better. And then the last thing you want to think about is using indirect characterization. So instead of saying, somebody is this, like this person is like this, you want to use an indirect characterization. You want to use some kind of example or some form of describing them, an incident that happens that shows that they're like whatever it is that you're trying to say they're like, instead of actually telling the reader that this is the kind of person they are. So an example for that would be something like, Mark was a bad friend, right? You're telling the reader that Mark was a bad friend. And that's cool. We don't like Mark. We don't like bad friends. But we don't feel like we hate Mark for being a bad friend, right? Like we're not feeling how bad of a friend Mark really is. And he could be a horrible friend, right? So instead, saying something, putting a passage like something like this in your book would be a lot better. David remembered the last time he had to wait for Mark in the middle of nowhere. It was a rainy night, much like this one, and by the time the car rolled into the parking lot, he was soaked from head to toe and shivering like his grandma's chihuahua. As the window rolled down, Mark's laugh filled the empty street. You look like shit, he said, and David couldn't help but smile. There was nothing else you could do with a guy like Mark. So obviously Mark is a shit friend. We get that. Poor David is standing there. It's wet. It's raining. It's the middle of the night. He's shivering. He's cold. And Mark's laughing, telling him he looks like crap. So that's like a bad friend, right? Like not even apologizing for being late. That's a bad friend. But we never once in that state, like in that passage, did we say Mark was a bad friend. But you can feel that Mark is a bad friend because we showed what a bad friend he was. Simply by David standing there, and again, the same thing happens. It's deja vu. He's remembering the last time Mark made him wait like this in the middle of the night. So Mark can't be counted on. He's a bad friend, right? So stuff like that. So using Indirect characterization is a really great way to show instead of telling. It will bulk up your novel and your word count a bit more, but it will bulk it up in the right area. So again, this also goes back to just using strong details, right? So you're not using details for the sake of using details. We described that incident about Mark and David because it showed what a bad friend Mark was, right? And if you deconstruct every single sentence in that passage, you'll see that it meant something. It was there to show something. So we're the middle of the night, the middle of nowhere, right? Scary place. You're by yourself. You think your friend would be worried. So that's bad friend number one. It's raining, right? Bad friend number two. Like, why would you leave your friend in the rain when they could get sick and it's freezing cold, right? The laughter. Like not acknowledging, not apologizing, like we said, bad friend again, number three. Telling him that telling David he looks like shit. Bad friend number four, don't call your friends names, right? And then at the end, that last part where there was nothing else you could do with a guy like Mark, and that implies that Mark does this all the time and there is no changing him. So he is just by nature a very bad friend, right? So everything about that passage was structured in a way to show the character of Mark without telling the reader the character of Mark. So you want to think about stuff like that. So those are kind of like the main things you want to think about for show versus tell. It's all about the details, the descriptions. It's putting your reader in the story, in the shoes of your character, whoever it is, or even as just the overseeing eye, but they're in the story. And they're feeling what everybody else is feeling. They're experiencing your story, your scenario, your scene on a sensory level. And that's kind of what you want to think about when you're thinking of show versus tell. So there's that very famous quote that says, don't tell me the moon is shining, but show me the reflection of light on broken glass, right? So that's kind of the idea about it, right? Like you don't want to tell somebody the moon is shining. You want to let them know the moon is shining indirectly. So that's show is how much indirection can you place in your words, in your novel. And it's a really fun exercise to do. Like when you go through edits, I actually, like at first I was taken aback a little because it is a lot of work to go through your entire manuscript, especially if you write longer ones like I do, and go through and just take out all the tells and replace them with shows. But it is so worth it in the end because what you're going to have is a much stronger novel and a much more poignant novel, right? You're going to have a draft that makes the reader want to flip the pages because they feel something for your story, right? And that's the whole point of show, is you don't want to hit your reader over the head with details. You just want them to kind of feel your story and feel their way through that story as they read it. So hopefully that was useful for you. And I hope that kind of helped explain show versus tell. There's so much out there, that you can read too. Like if you just Google show versus tell, there's a lot, of information out there too that you can find online. I highly, highly recommend the Emotion Thesaurus or any of the other thesauruses that I have linked below because they're, such a great collection of books, and resources for authors. Truly, like the authors that wrote it did like an amazing job with putting them together, and they're great references to have if you're stuck, if you're thinking of how to show and not tell. The Emotion Thesaurus is just really good for that, especially for the character showing, not telling. So take a look at those if you're looking for some more author resources. And thank you so much, as always, for sticking around, for subscribing if you're subscribed. And if you just subscribed today, thank you for that as well. And welcome to the community. And as always, I hope that you will stay magical. And I will see you next week for another video. Bye.